India's bold move that shocked the United States, let me tell you, did not come out of nowhere. It was not a sudden flick of the switch. It was not an emotional decision. It was the result of years, decades, even centuries of preparation. People think nations rise overnight, but the truth is, no country rises overnight. It happens because of a vision, discipline, sacrifice, and timing. India waited, calculated, and finally made a move that nobody expected, and that one decision is sending tremors across Washington. When you play a game against the biggest power in the world, you don't play it on their terms, you play it on yours, and this is exactly what India has done. The world has always underestimated India. For centuries, India was portrayed as the land of poverty, chaos, and division. The West loved to show the problems, but never the potential, and in those years of mockery and dismissal, India was quietly building. The U.S. thought India would remain a junior partner, a follower, someone who needed approval before making a decision. But this time, India showed that it doesn't need permission. India showed that it has the power to take decisions that even the United States cannot control. And that is what shook the entire foundation of geopolitics. So what was this bold move? The move was not just about military strength, not just about trade agreements, not just about technology. It was about sovereignty. India decided that it would no longer play the game of dependency. It would not dance to the tune of the dollar. It would not wait for approval before making strategic ties. It would not hesitate to buy oil from Russia, trade with Iran, invest in Africa, build defense systems with France, or create its own networks outside of the Western order. India's bold move was simple: declare to the world, without saying it out loud, that it is no longer a pawn. It is a player. And when that statement becomes reality, it terrifies the United States. The U.S. has been used to control. For decades, Washington dictated who trades with whom, who can rise, and who must fall. They thought sanctions were enough to bend nations. They believed access to the dollar and U.S. markets was the ultimate weapon, and yes, many countries bowed down, but India didn't. India turned sanctions into opportunities. When the U.S. told India not to buy Russian energy, India didn't just ignore the warning. It bought more, refined it, sold it to the world, and made profits. That's not rebellion, that's intelligence. That's not chaos, that's strategy. And when you see that kind of boldness, you realize why the U.S. is shocked. India is no longer apologizing for its rise. For decades, Indians were told to be humble, to be thankful, to always remain in the shadows of the West. But this generation, this leadership, has no time for that. They don't care if Washington approves. They don't care if London applauds. They don't care if the West is uncomfortable. They are driven by one thing: India's destiny. And destiny doesn't wait for permission. You see, the U.S. is not afraid of India because of what it is today, but because of what it will become tomorrow. America looks at India and sees 4 billion people who are no longer poor peasants waiting for foreign aid, but educated youth, ambitious entrepreneurs, skilled engineers, bold leaders, and a growing middle class that refuses to settle for less. They see a market bigger than their own, a workforce younger than theirs, and a culture older than their entire history. When a nation like that decides to rise, no superpower can stop it, and that's why this move shocked them. India is telling the world, we don't need the U.S. to validate us. We don't need NATO to protect us. We don't need IMF loans to survive. We are building our own future on our own terms. That kind of confidence is more powerful than any missile or tank. Confidence is the ultimate weapon, and India has found it. Think about it. When was the last time a nation of India's size stood up to the U.S.? Without fear, Russia did it, but Russia is isolated. China does it, but China is distrusted. India, on the other hand, does it while still being respected, still being courted, still being invited. That's the genius of this move. India shocks the U.S., but the U.S. cannot afford to isolate India. Why? Because they need India. They need India against China. They need India for trade. They need India for technology. And when you are needed, you can negotiate from strength. That is India's power today. The U.S. is realizing that India has options. It can lean toward Russia, build with China, invest in Africa, trade with Europe, dominate in the Middle East, and still hold influence in the Indo-Pacific. That's a position very few nations enjoy. India is like the one student in the class who doesn't beg for attention but ends up being the most popular anyway. And the teacher, in this case the U.S., is nervous because they can't control that student anymore. But let me tell you the most important part of this bold move. It's not about shocking the U.S. for the sake of ego. It's about inspiring Indians. For the first time in modern history, Indians are seeing their country not as a victim, but as a leader. They are seeing their country not as someone begging for opportunities, but creating them. They are seeing their country not as weak, but as powerful. And when 1 billion people start believing in their own strength, that's when transformation happens. That's when no outside force can stop them. The U.S. is shocked because it has never seen India like this before. For decades, India was predictable. Slow reforms, cautious diplomacy, endless debates. But now, India is unpredictable. One day it signs a deal with Russia, the next day with the U.S., the next day with Japan, then with Africa, then launches a space mission, then tests hypersonic missiles, then builds semiconductor plants. You can't put India in a box anymore, and when you can't control the narrative, you fear the outcome. India's bold move is also a reminder to every developing nation. You don't need permission to rise. You don't need to be dependent on aid. You don't need to accept the conditions of the West. You can create your own path, you can set your own rules, and you can still succeed. That's why the world is watching India, not just as a rising power, but as an example. If India can stand up to the U.S., why can't Africa? Why can't Latin America? Why can't Southeast Asia? That's the real fear in Washington, that India will inspire others. And let's be clear, this move is not about provoking America. It's not about hostility, it's about balance. For too long, the global balance has been tilted in one direction. India is correcting it. India is saying, this world is not yours alone. This is a multipolar world. Respect must be mutual. Partnership must be equal. That's the message, and it's powerful. You know why the U.S. is really nervous. Because they see that India's strength is not borrowed, it's earned. It's not dependent on military bases. It's dependent on minds. It's not built on debt. It's built on innovation. It's not forced by propaganda. It's fueled by culture, history, and resilience. That kind of strength lasts. Empires built on control collapse when the control is gone. But nations built on self-belief rise generation after generation. India's bold move is a declaration. We will not be trapped by the rules of yesterday. We will not let history define us. We will not let foreign powers dictate our future, and the U.S., for the first time, has to accept that. Now let me talk about the psychology of this. America has always been comfortable when others followed. But they get uncomfortable when someone plays their own game better than them. India is not copying America. India is not trying to be the U.S. India is being India. That's what makes it powerful. When you embrace your own identity, your own strength, you become unstoppable. That's why this shocked the U.S., because they never expected India to be this bold while staying authentic. India's rise is not just geopolitical, it's spiritual, cultural, and psychological. It's the awakening of a civilization that has seen it all, empires rising and falling, invaders coming and going, colonizers exploiting and leaving. And after all of that, India still stands. That's the kind of resilience you cannot underestimate. America knows this, and it scares them. So what comes next? India will continue to shock. This is not a one-time move. This is a pattern. Every year, every decision, India will keep showing that it cannot be boxed in. It will build partnerships, but not dependencies. It will create technology, but on its own terms. It will protect its sovereignty at any cost. And every time it does that, the U.S. will realize that the era of one-sided power is ending. India's bold move that shocked the U.S. is more than just politics. It's history being rewritten, and the message is clear. If you underestimate India, you will be surprised. If you try to control India, you will fail. If you try to stop India, you will only make it stronger. That's the truth the U.S. is facing today, and the truth the world is beginning to accept. So let the world watch. Let America be shocked. Let the West be nervous. Because India is no longer the silent observer of global history. It is the author now, and the pen is in its hands. India's ability to maintain ties with both U.S. allies and U.S. rivals simultaneously shocked Washington, proving its unmatched balancing power. It marked the birth of India's assertive military doctrine backed by innovation. For decades, global politics was written as if nations had to pick sides. You were either with the United States or you were against it. You were either a Western partner or a rebel state. You either obeyed Washington's sanctions or you became a pariah. That formula worked for years because smaller nations feared isolation. They feared the collapse of their economies. They feared being cut off from Western-dominated markets. But India decided it would no longer live in that binary world. India looked at the game and rewrote the rules. It decided that it could talk to Russia, buy energy from the Middle East, collaborate with Japan, invest in Africa, sign agreements with France, and still host American delegations all in the same week. That balance is not confusion, it is strategy. It is the art of creating leverage, the art of never being trapped, and the art of showing that sovereignty cannot be negotiated away. When Washington looked at India, they expected hesitation. They thought India would be cautious, scared to upset America, worried about sanctions, worried about losing U.S. support, but instead, India doubled down on independence. When the U.S. demanded India stop purchasing Russian oil, India not only refused but increased the purchases. When America tried to push India into military dependency, India bought French Rafales, signed technology deals with Israel, worked with Russia on missiles, and simultaneously did defense exercises with the U.S. That is not inconsistency, that is balance. Washington is not used to seeing such confidence from a non-Western nation. Most countries crumble under pressure, but India used pressure as fuel. The reason this balance shocked Washington so deeply is because it undermines the very foundation of American foreign policy. The U.S. relies on alliances. NATO works because America expects loyalty. Sanctions work because America expects compliance. Trade deals work because America expects dependence. But India has created a new category, partnership without submission. That's something the U.S. is not ready for. India shows up at the Quad with the U.S., Japan, and Australia, smiling and shaking hands, but the next day it is signing a massive defense contract with Moscow. India attends Western summits, but still strengthens BRICS with China, Brazil, and Russia. India sits in G20 meetings with Europe and America, but at the same time pushes for global South coalitions that challenge the Western economic order. This is not betrayal, this is balance, and balance is power. India's military doctrine has been reshaped by this very idea. It is no longer just about defending borders, it is about securing strategic independence. A nation that depends on one superpower for weapons, intelligence, or energy is a nation that can be controlled. India learned this lesson the hard way after decades of reliance on Russian platforms and American technology embargoes. That is why the new doctrine is about diversification. Buy from everyone, learn from everyone, build with everyone, but depend on no one. When you look at India's defense portfolio today, you see U.S. drones, Russian S-400s, French Rafales, Israeli missiles, and homegrown BrahMos systems all existing together. That mix is not chaos, it is genius. It ensures that no country can hold India hostage by cutting off supplies. Washington knows this, and it frustrates them. They cannot dangle weapons as leverage. They cannot use sanctions as a threat, because India has options. Options equal power. The innovation backing this doctrine is equally shocking to the U.S. For years, America believed that cutting-edge military technology would remain in the West. They thought nations like India would always be followers, buyers, importers, not creators, but India proved them wrong. Hypersonic missile research, space-based defense systems, indigenous nuclear submarines, AI-driven drones, and advanced cyber warfare programs are no longer dreams. They are reality in Indian labs and factories. The U.S. realizes that India is no longer simply a customer in the global arms market. It is a competitor, and that terrifies them because the moment India becomes an exporter of advanced defense systems, the U.S. loses one of its biggest tools of influence. The fact that India is already selling BrahMos missiles to nations like the Philippines shows that day has already arrived, but beyond technology. The real shock is in diplomacy. The U.S. has built its global image on the belief that nations cannot be friends with both America and its rivals. They expect countries to make choices, but India refuses. India does military drills with the U.S. Navy in the Indo-Pacific, while simultaneously joining hands with Russia for joint exercises in Siberia. India discusses Indo-Pacific security with Japan and Australia, while still participating in energy deals with Iran. India signs technology cooperation with Europe, but maintains its strong partnership with China in multilateral forums. This balancing act is not weakness, it is mastery. Because when you are the only country that can talk to all sides, you become the center. The U.S. is shocked because it is realizing that nations are starting to come to India, not just to Washington. When they want balance, another layer of this balance comes from economics. India has quietly reduced its reliance on Western financial systems. By building UPI and RuPay, by experimenting with digital currency, by trading in local currencies with Russia and the UAE, India has weakened the chokehold of the dollar. America always believed the dollar was its ultimate weapon, the one thing nobody could escape. But India has shown that alternatives exist. This does not mean abandoning the dollar overnight, but it means never being trapped. When nations see India trading in rupees with Russia or creating payment linkages with Singapore, they realize that dependence on U.S. controlled systems like SWIFT is not permanent. That again reduces Washington's leverage and increases India's freedom to maneuver soft power is another factor in this balance. America is used to being the cultural giant of the world, but Indian culture has quietly spread everywhere. Bollywood, yoga, spirituality, cuisine, technology services, and the diaspora have built an influence that no sanctions can erase. While Washington was busy thinking about military alliances, India was winning hearts and minds. This matters because soft power makes diplomacy smoother. When Indian leaders visit Africa, Southeast Asia, or the Middle East, they are greeted not just as politicians, but as representatives of a civilization that has been respected for thousands of years. That respect translates into support, and support translates into leverage. America is realizing that this cultural depth gives India diplomatic flexibility that the U.S. cannot match. The U.S. is shocked because India is rewriting the playbook of great power politics. Instead of being a junior partner like Britain, or a hostile rival like China, or a sanctioned power like Iran, India is creating a fourth model, the independent balancer. This is the role that truly shifts global power. Because if India can succeed in maintaining ties with both allies and rivals, other nations will follow. Imagine a world where no country fears cutting ties with the U.S. because they have India as a partner. That is the nightmare scenario for Washington, and it is slowly becoming reality. What makes this balance even more powerful is that it is not just diplomatic, it is psychological. India is teaching its people, its allies, and even its rivals that sovereignty is priceless. For decades, India was seen as a hesitant democracy, too worried about global opinion. But today, India acts with boldness. It launches strikes when attacked. It speaks confidently in international forums. It vetoes when necessary, and it refuses to apologize for its decisions. This confidence is new, and it is contagious. Other nations see it and are inspired. Washington sees it and is unsettled, because confidence is harder to fight than weapons. A confident nation does not back down easily, and 1 billion confident people create a force that cannot be ignored. At the core of this bold balancing power is strategy, not chance. Every step India takes is calculated. When it buys oil from Russia, it ensures discounts that strengthen its economy. When it signs deals with the U.S., it ensures technology transfer instead of blind dependency. When it builds ties with Iran, it secures a gateway to Central Asia. When it strengthens relations with Israel, it gains critical defense technologies. When it partners with Africa, it creates future markets. Each move is tied to long-term vision. That vision is what shocks the U.S., because for the first time in decades, America is facing a player that is not improvising, but planning ahead. And planning nations cannot be easily manipulated. Washington is used to seeing nations panic under pressure. But India has shown calmness. When oil prices spiked, India calmly secured supply lines. When China provoked on the border, India calmly mobilized without giving up its diplomacy. When the U.S. threatened sanctions, India calmly ignored and moved forward. This calm confidence is what unsettles America the most. Because when you can remain calm under pressure, you control the game. America is realizing that India does not play by fear anymore. It plays by strategy, and strategy always wins in the long run. It marked the birth of India's assertive military doctrine, backed by innovation. A doctrine where independence is as important as deterrence, where diplomacy is as critical as firepower, where partnerships are many but dependency is zero, where sovereignty is the foundation and innovation is the shield, where balance itself becomes the ultimate weapon.